Hey kids, Jeff Hawkins from Shake Them Ropes here, and for almost 15 years we have been part of Voices of Wrestling. Myself and Chris Novembrino give a review of that week's news, the lazy river of wrestling criticism of that week's WWE and AEW, and then Vader Club, where we watch something from one of our past, or something we may have missed. Smart, snarky, and sometimes serious, but not always. That's us, and if that's your vibe, we'd love to have you listen to Shake Them Ropes every week on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network.
Hello, do you like New Japan Pro Wrestling? Are you a Shin Nihon freak? If so, check out the Super J-Cast with Joel and Damon on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network.
And even if you fucking hate New Japan Pro Wrestling, listen to the Super J-Cast anyway. Not just for our great show reviews, analysis, and pastrami sandwiches, but there's also usually some dick jokes somewhere in the obligatory opening 30 minutes of absolute nonsense we chat about every single week. That's the Super J-Cast for all the best talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling, crisps, and pornography.
Welcome to this week's episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Hungee here on the Voices Wrestling Podcasting Network. I'm Fred. I'm without Tyler, who is watching football, I can only assume. Which, hey, who can blame him? But my guest at this time, the Renee Young 5 times the Dynamite special, Adam Berger, is joining us for the second time. Adam, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to jump on in Tyler's absence and talk a little Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame.
Yeah. So that's pretty much what we're going to do today. We're just going to talk about different aspects of the ballot. You have a ballot, correct, Adam?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I thought so. I also have a ballot. I apparently have impressed Dave enough to receive one, oddly, for the past few years. So I'm going to assume a basic level of familiarity with the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. I'm going to hit some high notes real quick. One, no, it's not just people put in by Dave. If you think that you don't know what you're talking about, you should do a little basic reading. Two, okay, so you are evaluating candidates on 3 categories. And as long as they have, if in your mind done enough to get inducted in one category, then you should vote for them, is essentially the rules. There's drawing, there's in-ring, basically, or performing well at your role, I should say. And then there's influence on the, positive influence on the industry. And we'll definitely get to that with, I assume we're going to talk about Sabu. So I think that's probably Sabu's strongest point of his case, but and it's broken down into different categories: historical performers, which is really, that should say US and Canada, modern US, Canada, Japan, Mexico, rest of the world, and then the non-wrestlers, all of whom fall under one of the previous categories. You can vote for a certain limit within each category. Historical is 6, as well as modern US, Canada. Japan is a max of 3 this year. Mexico is a max of 3. Rest of the world is 4. And then you can vote for a total of 7 non-wrestlers in addition to the previous. Actually, I'm kind of confused on that limit. Can you vote for? Can you vote for like 6 modern US, and then if there's like an additional, if there's modern non-wrestlers, can you vote for them too?
Yeah. So the way it's set up is non-wrestlers are a separate category from wrestlers. However, in terms of how the voting percentage is calculated, there's not like a non-wrestler region. The non-wrestlers are within the region, within one of the existing regions. So like as an example, Bobby Bruns, Joe Higuchi, and Koichi Yashizawa, they are in Japan, even though they're while also being non-wrestlers. And then like Ted Turner is and Jim Johnston, Mike Tenay, like those are non-wrestlers who are in the modern US versus Jesse Ventura, Gorilla Monsoon, Morris Siegel, and some of those other like older non-wrestler candidates there in the historical US. It's a little bit confusing, I'll say, but basically the voting limit is based on, I think it's 33% of each region, like the number of candidates in each region.
Yes.
So non-wrestlers are essentially their own region, but their denominator in terms of percentage is like within either modern US, historical, Japan, Mexico, wherever they reside within that.
Gotcha. I have not done my ballot yet because this is the busiest time of year for work for me. So I have not even started narrowing it down because I've just been running around with my hair on fire. Adam, how far along are you this year?
I'm pretty far along. I've got a few spots open still. So we can get into that. I think I'm pretty set on modern US. I think I have all my votes figured out for that. But in terms of the other, and in Mexico, actually, this is the first year I'm voting in Mexico. We can talk about that a little bit because of Gran Hamada. I'm motivated to because of Gran Hamada. So that's been fun doing research this year for Mexico. I think I finally figured out who my three are. But yeah, there's definitely, I still got a few spots open here and there, so we can talk about that when we get into the region and see if you might be able to persuade me on anybody you feel strongly about, because definitely have a few spots open.
And I always enjoy this time of year because it's just fun to talk about like historically important wrestlers and like kind of talking about their careers and so on and so forth. And I just think that's really enjoyable. So where would you like to get started, Adam? I'm going to allow you to kind of steer this ship as far as subject.
All right. Well, actually, you've written a bit about the Hall of Fame recently. So you had, I think it was 4 recommendations onto how to make the ballot better. I wanted to talk about that a little bit before we get into the candidates.
Sure, yeah. That is on voicesofwrestling.com, and it's 4 changes needed to improve the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame ballot. Now, I am already taking a victory lap because a couple years ago, before Dave added the categories to the non-wrestler options, he did not, and I wrote a column about how that was very confusing. It was leading to people like, oh, I'm not going to vote in Modern US, but I'm going to vote for a non-wrestler that falls under Modern US because I don't realize that, and affecting the percentages that way. And Dave added that. So as the preeminent Dave influencer, obviously, so I was like, you know what? I'll write some stuff about how the balloting works and how it could be better. And fingers crossed that, maybe I'll get some more wins. Who knows?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm also going to take credit for that because I sent in Dave. I think I can't remember. He did a show with Garrett Gonzalez, who was co-host on WR, and also John Pollock was on. And I sent in, that was a question that I sent in was, hey, nice. Can you please add the regions for the non-wrestlers so we know which ones they're in? So I think it was a tag team effort because Dave definitely reads your stuff. So I'm going to take a little bit of credit for that too, but I'm happy we were able to get that done. Also, I find it funny that one of your recommendations was to take off Ten Koji and just put Kojima on by himself, because I have also asked Dave to do that. I don't think he's going to do it.
It's on too, but yeah. No, it's especially when you're because I think this kind of folds into the first part as well. That article is that Dave has about 3 years ago now, I think it is. He maybe 2 because time is a lie. He added a bunch of tag team candidates as an attempt to kind of emphasize the induction of that group, of that kind of act more, versus what had previously been a very singles observer or a singles heavy Hall of Fame. And I think if you really just look at like dates of induction for tag teams, it's really informative as to how ignored that style of act has been. Like, let me get the dates here. So the Midnight Express were not inducted until 2009. The Rock and Roll Express weren't inducted until 2014. I mean, those 2 dates are like kind of wild to me. And I felt like they should have been, much earlier. It felt like they were just really easy calls.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think part of it too was that's just conceptually, like, the most Sports Hall of Fame start a lot earlier in industry's existence, and then everyone's kind of voted on in real time, or like, as they retire. Yeah. So, but with the Observer one didn't start until 96. So like everyone who went in the first, with the inaugural class, it was like 100 people or whatever, maybe 200, whatever. And it was like all the, most obvious ones that you can think of. But then there's a lot of other strong people that, didn't get added until later. Sometimes because Dave just forgot about them, or people didn't ask for them to get added. Like I remember one year Dave was like, "Oh, Jimmy Hart's not in." Like someone sent him a question. He's like, "Oh, I got to add him," and then he got in like pretty quickly thereafter.
Yeah, there was the manager. I keep wanting to say Dave Brown, but that's the announcer from Memphis. The Bobby Davis, is a great example of that too. I think,
Yeah.
is he was kind of forgotten about because he got out of the business relatively young, but when you find out that basically every successful manager from the 90s on is like, oh yeah, we just stole his act.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of amazing that he wasn't like in that 96 class of like no doubters. But fortunately, that did get fixed later, and that's great. I think that's really the positive impact of the Hall of Fame, is like getting to look at people like Bobby Davis, who is very much forgotten, and being like, no, actually, this guy is tremendously important, and
yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah, Johnny Rougeau getting in last year was really cool to see too.
Yeah,
because that's why this is so much fun, is because it's not just like, people make jokes about the WWE Hall of Fame or like some other like promotional ones where it's just kind of like anyone who had any level of relevance there gets in. So this is a way for it to, be an actual distinction and an honor, because it's very difficult to get in, but also it involves researching and helping everyone learn about like really important figures in the industry that maybe because they happened like, I don't know, like 75, 80 years or more ago, like people aren't as aware of them. So it's just the whole process is really fascinating to learn about the different candidates and see all the different research people do and the conversations they have about it. So yeah, it's a very, very fun time of year. I was going to bring up though on your column. So you had two things that I think actually kind of go together.
Mm-hmm.
So one was, and I think I have an alternative solution to present, but so I'll just say one of them was Edge, like having 50 and 50 apply to Edge, and the other one was people falling off the ballot and then getting added back on 2 years later, like while they're so they have to expend at least a year off if they get under 10% and fall off. But then oftentimes Dave will add people back on, like Seth Rollins is back this year for
he's the classic. He's on his third time. Yeah, this is crazy. In 5 years.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem with both of those things, it's really just that the 35 is too young to start adding people on it.
I disagree.
So here's the thing: both of those get solved if you just move it to 40. Because
40 would be a fair number, but I honestly at this point I think I'm halfway at the stance I'm at, because the whole discourse drives me crazy. Like people are just like, 35 is too young, and like it's just been being said for like a quarter of a century at this point, and it's like I just don't care anymore. Like, let's stop discussing this.
Well, I think it solves a couple things. One is when Dave set the age originally, like the logic behind it was you don't want to wait too long until people have exited their prime, because then the voters might not remember how great they were exactly. He wants the voting to be close to like the prime of candidates.
Sure.
And back in the mid 90s, it was it wasn't that long, and actually it was still happening where Joshi were retiring like before age 30, right?
Yeah.
But now you have Edge well into his 50s still being active, or like AJ Styles is already in, John Cena's already in, but Punk in his mid 40s now, like so you have guys that are wrestling well into their 40s and even into their 50s and still being relevant headliners for national promotions. So I think part of it's just I think it sometimes Hall of Fames will change the criteria a little bit, or in terms of like what the waiting period is over time. And I think this is one that would just kind of you wouldn't have situations like Edge where he's been on the ballot for like over 15 years already, but he's still active and presumably adding to his case. We can talk about whether he is or not, but it would solve for those things. It would also solve for like Moxley or Seth Rollins or guys like who get on early and then fall off and then, get added back a couple of years later, because they have added a bit in the 2 years since, but still maybe haven't added enough to really like meet the qualifications to get in just yet. So then they're kind of on the ballot early and kind of take up space where, even though they're not going to get in yet, but then that takes away potentially from some of maybe the older candidates to making like a final decision on them. So anyway, I think if you just push it back 5 years, then it would solve a lot of these things now.
I would actually argue that 35 is good, because we do tend to forget how good guys are pretty quickly. And I am going to zig where others zag, or maybe zag where others zig. I think Shinsuke Nakamura is actually the perfect example of this, because he and Kurt Angle are like the modern they were put in too soon guys. Like those are the very common talking points with them. And I think Nakamura, now I'm saying this as someone that got into Japanese wrestling in 2013 because of that, like the high watermark of New Japan during the mid to late teens, and Nakamura being such a big part of that. I think that he accomplished enough to be inducted at that point in time. And I honestly think that if we waited until he was 40, he might not have been inducted. And because we're talking about that, we would have first evaluated him in 2020. And I think that maybe people would be too dismissive, because basically after 2018-ish, he was just like, I'm here to surf. And
sure, that's fair. I guess, I don't know. I think Kurt Angle would have gotten in. Well, he did. He got in early, relatively early in his career. He would have gotten in anyway.
I think so, yeah.
Eventually. And yeah, Nakamura is always an interesting point. Some people say like he got in too soon, or like his WWE run hurt him. I don't know. Like, I get his WWE run was underwhelming, but
yeah,
he still did a lot for, like, he was NXT's highest drawing champion, and helped establish that as like a touring brand, which maybe it's not necessarily as strong now, but for a while it
not his fault.
Yeah, that was after he was gone. And then hey, he did headline for a while in WWE. He had like a couple of years there where he was in main events, and they've used him sparingly in main events. Obviously his performances nothing like they were in New Japan, but he also has historical significance, because you can argue he's like the most successful like Japanese export to the US,
at least male, I think.
At least in for like a full-time person, like if you want to like Giant Baba's brief run, like maybe or Antonio Inoki coming over every once in a while, like maybe you could make some arguments there. But in terms of like just an export being full-time for a while, like he was he was very successful, even if his performances were a little underwhelming. So I think I don't have any regrets on him being in at all.
Yeah, I think he's a worthy Hall. I think he's a worthy Hall guy. Another thing that I think kind of goes against the Nakamura is hurt by his WWE run, like being up and down, is Mystico. I mean, the thing with Mystico is before WWE, he was just a fantastic superstar in CMLL. And then after WWE, there was like a couple of years where, everyone was kind of figuring out exactly where are we right now. Like it was a very, the whole, like, I am Caristico, I am Mystiziz, I am Mystico thing was very confusing. But these past few years, like, he's just like, okay, I'm the best draw in Mexico again, and arguably the world. Deal with it.
It was. He's, for anyone who had questions about him like a few years ago, he's definitely answered all of them by now. So he's more than proven it at this point.
I think maybe I am still catching up on Stardom, a promotion that I'm pretty badly behind on, but I think that Thez Flair this year should really come down to Mystico or Saya Kamitani.
I mean, they're the two most important wrestlers.
I think that's fair, yeah.
relative to their promotions, like they're definitely the two most important, I would say, because WWE has been a bit more of and AEW both been more of like ensemble casts instead of just one person on top constantly.
I mean, I think I would say maybe Mox and AEW, and maybe Hangman would surpass him by the end of the year if he keeps the belt the entire time. But I just don't think that what he's done is either of them is comparable to Mystico or Saya. I don't think anyone in Japan. Elsewhere, like Zack Sabre Jr., while their drawing has really fallen off and the creative has hit the skids pretty badly. I think Ozawa would have had an argument if he hadn't have been hurt, and if Noah also wasn't prone to really Noah things. Mm. And WWE, like I think that's just really too ensemble this year to really have a dude there.
There's also Hiroki Goto before he had to.
Well, yeah.
Go away to be Honda in Street Fighter.
God, that movie's gonna suck.
It's surreal that isn't Cody in that? And
he is. This has got to be some
Roman
money
in it
laundering.
Too?
I'm pulling up the cast right now, or at least I'm trying to. There is some this. I kind of just wish this is revealed to be a money laundering scheme, because this cast is this is like some PCP casting. All right. Noah Centineo. Do not know who that is. He was the lead in the To All the Boys franchise in Netflix. Those are fun little movies. All right. Andrew Koji as Ryu. He played Yoichi the Father Kimura in Bullet Train. Jace Momoa as Blanca.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. Roman Reigns as Akuma. Is Akuma just going to sit in a chair and just say "wise man" a bunch? I don't know, man.
I'm assuming the characters the wrestlers are playing aren't going to have a lot of speaking lines.
I'd hope not. We got 50 Cent as Balrog. We got Cody as Guile. Eric Andre is Don Savage, a character I definitely know. Orville Peck is Vega. Hiroki Goto is E Honda. This is bizarre stuff.
Yep, hopefully we get to see Hiroki Goto mix it up with Cody and Roman Reigns, but I'll be watching. I have to watch that. I'll probably be have some alcohol when I do, but it'll make for a fun time.
I may catch that on streaming after it, bombs at the box office. If this thing makes money, I'm just going to be concerned about American culture far more than anything else. Anyways,
speaking of American culture, let's get into modern US.
Yeah, man, Adam with the transition, nailing it. There we go. So I definitely have not done my ballot, but I can tell you. Well, okay, I could tell you who I voted for last year, except for the fact that I closed that tab because I love closing tabs for no reason on my browser.
All right, I've got the list of the candidates up in different things. So the top two vote getters in modern US last year, returning anyway, because the Young Bucks and Roman Reigns both got in last year. So the top two vote getters returning are CM Punk, who was at 52% last year, and Cody Rhodes, who was at 48%. So, in my opinion, these are the two strongest guys in this region, head and shoulders above everybody else. Voted for both of them last year. Going to vote for both of them again this year. Where do you stand on both of those guys?
I'm sorry, CM Punk, and who was the other one? I apologize.
Cody
Rhodes. Cody. I think they're both slam dunks. I think at this point they've easily established their cases. I think Punk should have been in several years ago at this point. It's pretty obvious to me that he's been a good draw for quite a while. I think he at points was, despite his limitations, a very good worker. You can argue that he kind of helped make WWE's main event scene more welcoming to non-Vince body types. So I think that there is a bit of a, not a nothing influence case with him. And Cody, I mean, he's been a top draw in the business, and at one point the top draw, I would say, in the entire industry. He's still pretty close to that, frankly. I mean, I think that this title run has seemed much colder. The company's still doing pretty well, but you can see signs of it chilling a little bit. which is not to like really rip on anyone. It's just like, yeah, it changes a little bit. But I think between that and his importance to like the first All In to the founding of AEW, I mean, I think that all makes it very obvious to me that he should be in the Hall.
Yeah, I think in Cody's case, he very clearly meets the drawing criteria. Like, you can get after him a little bit for longevity on that, but when you're the top draw in the world, in the biggest company in the world, and like the primary or one of the primary reasons for like a historically successful business period with increasing consumer metrics, it's kind of, and to add to, so that's from a drawing perspective, and then obviously historical significance, that's part of that, fits into that as well. But then also his role in founding AEW additionally makes him very historically significant. So even if you're low on his work and performances, and I tend to include like promo ability in assessing that into the performance criteria as well, and he is a very good promo. So I think he really does he has a strong case for all three criteria. So it seems pretty obvious as the top pick. And then Punk, maybe not quite as historically significant, but I do think your point about him influencing who WWE would give chances to in their main event scene, and even who they hire, because now look, they're probably going to hire Bryan Danielson anyway, but I do think it's worth noting that Punk's successful run on top in 2009 where he had that Jeff Hardy feud, like they hire Bryan Danielson like right after that. That's when they bring him in, and then after that they're hiring like Sami Zayn and Kevin Steen and Seth Rollins as well, John Moxley. They start bringing those guys in. Now maybe they would have had to do that anyway eventually, because they've never been the best at, outside of that OVW class, they've never been the best at just producing their own guys. So they probably would have needed to do that anyway. But I do think it's worth noting that Punk's success there was like a precursor to them opening the doors to, bringing, I guess, guys who made names for themselves on the indies end versus just completely trying to rely on, people that they would develop themselves in-house, or only indie guys that met like a certain body type and size requirements of, someone like Austin Theory, for example.
Yeah, I agree with all that. So I think that those are two definite yeses for me. Another yes that I'm going to be casting is pretty easily a Sabu. And with me, that's going to be largely influence based. Like, I think that is, of all the guys with all the categories, like if you were to just say person X's drawing case is the best on this ballot, or person Y's or act Y's in-ring ability is the best argument on this ballot, I think Sabu's influence argument is quite possibly at least the best within this region of anyone. I think that you'd be foolish to say that he did not change how. I think you have to say, I'll make it. I'll get rid of the double negative. I think you would definitely have to say that he had dramatically changed how professional wrestling is done. Basically after his career, you can draw a line between pre-Sabu peak and post-Sabu peak, and just how, you can be negative on it because I think WWE in particular, but promotions tend to really rely on them as cheat codes for fan reactions. But table spots and ladder matches, that kind of whole hardcore thing. He really is the reason that it's so widely adopted. And I think that is, and there's going to be some people that are like, oh, but I don't like those matches, so it's a negative influence. I'm like, that's not his fault, man.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's always strange to me when like someone innovating something that became popular and prevalent, because the audience liked it. It's odd when like some critics try to penalize them because years later they just got copied. Like they just got copied over and over again, and a lot of other people did it poorly or just overdid it to the point where it lost its effectiveness. With Sabu specifically, I guess also he just like we've seen so much evolution since his prime. Like it, and look, I'm not quite old enough to remember. I wasn't there like following Sabu in real time in the early '90s. I do remember watching Nitro and seeing Sabu like debut on Nitro and thinking that he was crazy, and then getting into ECW a few years later and just getting as much of his stuff as I could. But it is like in real time, he was blowing people's minds. And I think that's like, if you look at the Observer Awards, and I think it was, I'm just going to pull it up right now, 94. So he was the number 2 wrestler of the year in the Observer Awards in 94 and number 2 most outstanding, and was number 5 in match of the year that year. So it's not just, he was just doing spots that blew people's minds that no one had ever seen before, but also like in terms of the people experiencing him in real time, they thought, well, this guy's the best thing going because he's so different from everything else that I've experienced before. And then very quickly after that, like so much of everything he did got ripped off and copied by people who weren't necessarily as athletic as he was, or didn't, because a lot of the stuff he did like made sense for his character. Like his character was a madman who was homicidal and suicidal. So like that made sense like within the context of his character, versus a lot of other guys who it wouldn't necessarily make sense for to do those crazy things. They just did them to look cool. So and it really does all start with him, like all that stuff. Obviously there was high flying before him, like Grand Hamada's on the ballot this year. And there's Jushin Thunder Liger and other guys that were flyers before him, but in terms of like incorporating the hardcore style and like combining like hardcore and athleticism together, like that wasn't something that anybody had really seen before or done before. So he's patient zero for that. And a lot of times people talk about the Hardy Boys influence, which is fair, and Edge as well for like the TLC matches, but none of that TLC stuff happens if Sabu didn't innovate what he did first.
Yeah, and also in Japan, like Hayabusa just outright ripped him off. Now, I mean, like I'm not saying that to knock Hayabusa. I think Hayabusa probably should be a Hall of Famer, but I'm not like as sold on him as Sabu. Like I lean yes, I'm not like a dead set yes, I think. But
right, I'll convince you on that later. But yeah,
okay, sure.
I mean, Izaki, said that like he said like, hey, Sabu was there. He was a young boy like in FMW when Sabu was wrestling with the Sheik there, and he directly copied Sabu's pants. Incorporated that part of Sabu into his look, and then obviously also a lot of the kind of the flying and mix of flying and hardcore stuff was based on Sabu. And then he did, I will say, just in his defense, Hayabusa's defense there, it wasn't completely Sabu because he could do things Sabu couldn't, and a lot of that came from the time he spent in Mexico, working with Ultimo Dragon and and different luchadors down there to add that kind of a lucharisu component into his offense as well. But yeah, again, Sabu direct influence on Hayabusa, who got over 50% last year, and I think should be in the Hall of Fame, and obviously a lot of other guys directly on the ballot as well. So yeah, I fully agree, and Sabu's also someone that I'll be voting for this year.
Anyone else you want to talk about in modern US?
Well, one of the guys I wanted to talk about ties into something else you wrote. So Samoa Joe's someone I'm going to vote for this year. I voted for him last year as well. And part of that was because I've talked about him a little bit. I think he's kind of like an inverse Paul Orndorff, like a modern one as well. And just to explain that, like Paul Orndorff was a guy who he headlined everywhere he went. and had successful runs everywhere he went. He was also regarded as, a good worker, not necessarily the best like in the world or anything, but he was, he was a good worker. But then he has this big run with Hogan, which is kind of like the crown jewel and what sets him apart from like a lot of his contemporaries, and was the big reason he got into the Hall of Fame, because he set these attendance records with Hulk Hogan. He was Hulk Hogan's like best opponent, at least for like the entirety of a career in a feud. Like Randy Savage or Andre the Giant, obviously, in terms of like maybe peak, or Piper in terms of maybe peaks, but he worked with Hogan so much, they can say like, okay, he's Hogan's best opponent. And so he has like that like big like crown jewel piece of his case that sets him apart. Otherwise it's like a ballot worthy career, but not necessarily a Hall of Fame career, right? And I think Samoa Joe's similar, but it's in terms of just he had a peak in the work criteria where he was the best wrestler in the world for a couple of years. And not just, I mean, for a couple of years he's in the conversation, but there's at least, I'd say 2005, you can say, no, this guy was the absolute best wrestler in the world. And in addition to, he wasn't, I don't think anyone can really make an argument he's a Hall of Fame level draw, but it's not like he doesn't have anything to offer in that criteria. And that's part of what the ballot says. It's not necessarily, someone doesn't necessarily have to be like Hall of Fame level in every single criteria. It says they should meet at least one and have something to offer in the others, unless they're so overwhelmingly strong in one that they just warrant induction on that alone. So with Joe, he does have something to offer from drawing, because he was NXT champion when they started touring, and he was part of that. He set TNA's pay-per-view record with Kurt Angle. Also headlined quite a few pay-per-views there. I want to say like at least around 20 or so. So at least the ones with Kurt were set their pay-per-view records. And then in WWE he headlined a bit, against AJ Styles, and had that feud with Brock Lesnar that actually did draw on pay-per-view when more people were still buying WWE pay-per-views. There's a noticeable difference between that. I think the show was called Great Balls of Fire.
Yes.
Between that. And then in AEW, he's been champion and headlined pay-per-views, and having great matches all along the way. Also became an incredible interview and promo. But then adding all that to this 4 or 5 year period where he was absolutely one of the best workers in the world, and at least I think in 2005, the best wrestler in the world. And I just wanted to bring him up too, because your award shares article that I always enjoy, he places pretty highly on that. Like you have his wrestler of the year. He's 36th all time. The only guys ahead of him that are not in the Hall of Fame are Will Ospreay. Again, we think Ospreay's going to go in eventually. CM Punk, we think Punk's going to go in. Cody, we think Cody's going to go in. Jon Moxley, I will be voting for Jon Moxley as well.
I will too.
And I think, okay. So basically, and then Edge is ahead of him only by 2 spots. Okay, so I don't think we're going to vote for Edge, but I'll just say everyone other than Edge ahead of him, and that is we have is in the Hall of Fame. So I think that's a credit to Joe there. But then Joe also shows up in some of the highest ranked guys and other work rate awards, like most outstanding. He's 4th in terms of non-Hall of Famers, behind Ospreay again, and then Davey Richards and Kenta. So he shows up there. Obviously, Punk, Cody, Moxley, those other guys that we just mentioned, they're not showing up in the most outstanding ones, but Joe is. So he's showing up in Wrestler of the Year. He's showing up in Most Outstanding, and then Match of the Year as well. He's 5th behind Ospreay, Kenta, Marufuji, and Edge in terms of non-Hall of Famers. But he's showing up in every one of those 3, right? The other guys that we talked about may have only shown up in 1 or 2. Yeah. So that's part of what I think enhances Joe's case there. That says, no, he really was a very, very special talent for 4 or 5 years there as a worker. And I just think we want to have the best workers from each era, Like, you want to have the biggest draws, the most historically significant wrestlers, but also the best workers from each era as well. And I think Joe meets that criteria, and he's just been successful everywhere he's worked as well. So he's kind of like a modern like territory guy, just kind of going from place to place, and being successful everywhere, and just a really unique career in the modern time period. But that like really high peak of work, that's what I think sets him apart and makes up for any sort of deficiencies that he might have elsewhere on his resume.
Yeah, I have Samoa Joe as like a guy I could vote for. I'm definitely not against him. I think the biggest issue with him is so much of his career just feels like it was wasted. And you can argue that, I mean, it's not really his fault, but you have to evaluate the career that he did have and not the career he should have. And I feel like, I don't know if it was half, but a significant part of his time in TNA was just a waste.
Yeah, I mean, everything, I don't think that time period is quite as much as you think it is, though. Because time, like you said, time has gone by incredibly fast lately. But I think he leaves TNA, what is it, like 2014, 2015? 15? Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, like, for the last 10 years, he's been, he hasn't always been headlining, but he has the NXT run, he has the WWE run, and then he has the AEW run. So that's the last decade. And then in TNA, I think his big world title run, which was overdue, way overdue, like years overdue, was in 08. And in 08, he had that, when he won the title, he had that crazy cage match with Kurt Angle that placed really highly in Match of the Year awards. So I think like the down period is probably like 09 through 14, right? So you get like 5 years there where he's not doing quite as much, and he kind of feels irrelevant. So yeah, that is a significant portion of his prime. But then you have like the 5 years before that where he's doing his ROH and TNA stuff, and then the past decade for the most part, and he was hurt some of that, or wasn't necessarily doing the biggest stuff, but there's a lot in the past decade. It doesn't feel like it's been a full decade, but it has been. So he's added quite a bit since then.
I'd push back on the full decade thing, because we are talking about like the late WWE run, and like from 2019 on, he was mostly like just mid card and then literally an announcer. And I think that, now granted, he was extremely good as an announcer, but I think it's very hard for me to give him Hall of Fame credit for pretty much anything significant on the main roster in WWE. And that's part of it. Now, I do think, because my rule of thumb is kind of like, I start to think about voting for you when you've had like what I would consider 8 Hall of Fame years. And I think you can piece that together from Joe's career for sure. At least basically you have the entirety of the Ring of Honor run, which overlaps with like the best parts of the early TNA run. And then you have, I think you could make an argument that he has had multiple AEW, multiple Hall of Fame level years in AEW. I think that he's a little bit hurt by disappearing fairly often in that, but I still think that like he has definitely done better there. And if you add in like the NXT years, because I think it was 2 that he was there, like I think you could definitely put together a case for him. I'm not saying no for him. My concern is that he might get squeezed off my ballot. Because we are limited to 7 this year, 6 this year, and I think the modern U.S. ballot is pretty damn deep. And I have 4 people I voted for last year that are returning, and I think is it 4 that I have returning? Let's count on air. 1, 2, yeah, it's 4. Okay, 5 actually. Excuse me. I don't know that I'd put him over. Like, I am a Becky Lynch voter, and I am at the point where I'm starting to wonder if Becky Lynch is, like, I still think she's a Hall of Famer, but I don't know if she's one of the top 6 candidates in this bunch. Yeah, I'd really have to sit down and think about that, because I think my top is like, we talked about Punk and Rhodes and Sabu already. I think I might have a hard time putting someone like Samoa Joe over, or Becky Lynch even, over the Briscoes. Just because I think that the Briscoes, like, to me, are a clear Hall of Fame case, just because they were a top level tag team for nearly 20 years in the industry. And I think their best argument and their Hall of Fame argument is in-ring capability, being excellent performers. And I don't think I can put Joe over them. So that's 4 acts for me, I think, at this point, or 3, sorry. And then I don't know if I would take Joe over Jon Moxley.
Yeah, so my ballot, in full transparency, I'll just say Modern US is the one I figured out. So like Punk and Rhodes, I'm voting for. Sabu, I'm also voting for. And then Jay and Mark Briscoe, who I voted for before, I'll be voting for them again. Jon Moxley, and then also Samoa Joe. So those are my 6 there. So everyone that you're kind of thinking of and batting around, I have all of them. So I'm not necessarily picking between any of them. Like Moxley, we can talk about Moxley a bit. I'll say Moxley, 2-time Wrestler of the Year. AEW's like the guy they've depended on the most to, obviously he's been champion the longest and definitely headlined the most pay-per-views in their history. So he's been very critical to their success. And I also always bring up that he was their top guy with, along with Jericho and Omega and Cody, the first, handful of months they were on the air, which was when they were so successful that TNT ripped up their ad share deal and gave them like a paying TV deal right before the pandemic started. So if they're not hugely successful right out of the gate, and him jumping there was definitely a big part of that, who knows if they, make it out of the pandemic once that hits. So I just think he's and also I think he is like a Hall of Fame level performer, like between the promos and just, he's not like your classically, like, I'll put it this way, just talking about Samoa Joe. The best Samoa Joe is like way better than Jon Moxley in my opinion, just as a wrestler. But Moxley just has a very high volume of great matches because he's been on TV constantly for the past like almost 15 years, and he's been successful there far more than he hasn't in terms of having great matches. So when you combine his promo ability into it, and again, 2-time Wrestler of the Year in the Observer Awards, and he just has he has a case for all 3 criteria. Maybe not quite as strong as Cody and Punk do, but I definitely think he has a case for all 3.
Yeah,
and he's definitely like one of the most memorable and important wrestlers of this era as well. So I think at this point you kind of have to vote for him. On that. So he's one of my guys. And then look, I do agree with you about Jay and Mark Briscoe. But part of what I'll bring up with them though is similar to Becky Lynch. I think part of their criteria is like historical significance of being, like the Bucks overshadowed them a little bit. So it's like the second best tag team of their era, or maybe if you want to go a little bit earlier, they were like the best team of the 2000s and the Bucks were the best team of the 2010s or something. Obviously historical significance is also a big part of Becky Lynch's case as well. I mean, that's the primary part of her case in terms of both influencing how women's wrestling was perceived and promoted in the US, as part of the 4 Horsewomen, and also headlining that Mania, and just being in that program with Ronda, which was the biggest program, like the legit main event program on the biggest show of the year in WrestleMania, which no women had ever accomplished before. So I get it, but with Becky and the Briscoes, there's both like a historical significance interpretation type thing. And so it's kind of like, for me, it's like, okay, how do I weigh that versus Joe, who I think is just one of the absolute best workers of his era. So it's like, am I giving more weight to some of this historical significant stuff, or just putting like one of the best wrestlers of the era, like prioritizing that? And ultimately that's kind of where I landed. Because the Briscoes, obviously amazing level of work, and I'm voting for them too because of that. But in considering them, Becky and Joe, those are different things. That's how my thought process was, to kind of figure out, okay, who was I going to include versus who was I going to leave out. I think I will vote for Becky eventually, but just not enough room this year. And I think Mercedes, who's added, I'm not voting for her either, but I think her and Becky are both two sides of the same coin, because Becky, she influenced, I think, the perception of how well women could draw in the U.S. And I think Mercedes' success slightly before that, in terms of changing the perception of how well women could work in the US, in terms, and for that WW audience, seeing, oh, like Sasha Banks can have matches that are just as good as the best male wrestlers in the company can have. That wasn't the case for at least any women WWE had for a long period of time. Like, you know, they had the Jumping Bomb Angels and Aja Kong very briefly for a little while. But in terms of like a female wrestler that they actually pushed for and promoted, like as a top star in the division for a while, Sasha was really the first one that was capable of having matches as good as anything the men were doing at that time. And I think that went a long way in terms of changing how women's wrestling was perceived and promoted in the US as well. So I think they're both, I don't think either of them are necessarily Hall of Fame level performers or, you know, or draws, but I think they do have something to offer in both of those criteria. And I think their historical significance make them, you know, you can, if someone votes for them, I don't blink or have any strong reaction to that. I think I will eventually, but just not quite this year.
Yeah. See, I'm I think by nature a big Hall of Fame guy, and looking at the ballot in modern US, I see 10 people I'd vote for right now, and so at that point you've got to basically choose. Either you're going to play like the game theory, oh, I'm got to vote for the people that are closest or the ones that need to stay on the ballot thing, or alternatively you just vote for, and I prefer to do it this way, you just vote for who you think the best candidates are. And I just think that's simpler and honestly a better, more honest way to vote, I think. And so my, you know, I've got Punk, Rhodes, the Briscoes, and Sabu and Stone on my ballot. And then after that, I've got to choose two from basically John Moxley, Samoa Joe, Becky Lynch, Mercedes Moné, Bill Goldberg, and the Steiners. I think the Steiners are probably the weakest of that batch. I'd be happy to see them in the Hall. I know they fell off the ballot or fell down in the balloting some after Rick Steiner decided to be transphobic, which is extremely shitty. I think that's, you know, if you look at the Hall of Fame and who's in it, I mean, I hate to say this, but if we couldn't get Chris Benoit recalled, it's just, that's just the reality of it. But they're my least of the six. So at this point, you know, I've got, because I think Bill Goldberg, the thing with him is detractors always bring up that his peak in WCW was so short, and they're right. I mean, it obviously was. I still think he was something of a draw in WCW, but like even later, but the company was such a shit show, like none of it mattered. You know, it's just like a completely doomed company. And so I think the thing that kind of made me decide that Goldberg was a Hall of Famer was the drawing he did in his admittedly limited appearances in WWE in the teens. And I think that was like what made me be like, oh, this guy is a legit like high level draw. And I think that's sufficient evidence, I guess, or sufficient amount of time for me to be like, yeah, you should be in the Observer Hall. I think that, like, you know, you can kind of say, okay, so you had like maybe 2 years in WCW. Now they're super high years, and the other 2 you can go back and forth on, or at least I do. But I think that you know, if you look at like from 2016 to the pandemic, I'd have a hard time saying that he wasn't a Hall of Fame level draw in those years, more or less. And like, I think that the part-time thing. I mean, I think what pushed Roman Reigns over the edge to being a Hall of Famer, and I was a year or two away from voting for Reigns. So, like, I'm not saying that I would vote for him today, but when he was voted in, which was, I closed the tab again. I am so good at this. God bless.
He went in last year. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So last year, yeah, I think that I might have voted for him this year, or I might have voted for him next year. I just think that he needed a little more, a couple more years of I am a Hall of Fame level draw.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just I think it's comparable. Well, the late WWE run for Goldberg to, the Hall of Fame years for Reigns.
All right. So I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I'm one of the preeminent Goldberg critics. And I was a Goldberg fan when I guess I'm still a Goldberg fan technically. I never hated the guy, but
Warren Hayes hates him.
Yeah, I'm not Warren. But my point on Goldberg is always, I think it's shorter than people think. So 98, yes, absolutely Hall of Fame draw. But one point I always like to make about that is WCW was already hot when Goldberg was coming in. He didn't build that. They were hot. He extended it, but they were already a hot company. And then obviously their booking was really bad even towards the end of 98. But when they were, and from a pay-per-view perspective, even when he was champion at the end of 98, they were doing better on pay-per-view at the end of 97 than they were at the end of 98. And then 99's when everything really falls off, and I think you can still make an argument, he's a Hall of Fame draw that year. So 98 and 99, but then 2000, he's out half the year because he punched through the limo window and tore up his arm.
Basically tried to die.
Yeah. So he's out half that year, and then I don't even think he wrestles he's basically done after the second half of 2000s, and 2000 was a mess anyway. So, all right, he's got two strong Hall of Fame drawing years in WCW, but I do think it's important to point out, he wasn't necessarily WCW's top draw. I think Hogan was still doing really well on pay-per-view during that time period. Sting, at least in the first half of 98, was an incredible pay-per-view draw. That year. And obviously Goldberg was an amazing ratings draw though. That was really impressive. But then also at that time you have Austin, Undertaker, The Rock, all Foley, Triple H, all really killing it in the WWF as well. Triple H was a little bit later, but Foley was part of that. So he wasn't the best draw in the world in either of those years. It was, the WWF guys were doing a bit better. So I think that's context to it. And then he goes to WWF in 03-04. That's kind of a mixed bag. I think that year he spent there is definitely a Hall of Fame drawing year, but it's not he didn't blow everything away. It's not like this. It's not like the Roman and Cody year where they're just expanding business, incredibly. He had a solid year there. And then I absolutely agree with you. The 16-17 run with Brock, awesome. He's moving a lot of numbers, and that was definitely a Hall of Fame 6 months or so from him. The problem though is after that, he doesn't wrestle again for another 2 years. It's in Saudi Arabia, those sold shows to Saudi Arabia against the Undertaker, which is a very infamous
disaster.
And then his 2020 run is also in Saudi Arabia when he squashes the Fiend, which
is that not Hall of Fame level?
I mean, it might be. I'm not going to give him drawing credit for the Saudi Arabia show though, but that was entertaining. And then it's the Pandemic Mania, right? So just
kind of a weird year to evaluate, but
and then he comes back the next year and just. He wrestles Drew at the Royal Rumble, which the fan base kind of turned on Goldberg at that point because it's all right, he's coming back again, and they're no, Drew's kind of our pandemic champion. We don't want Goldberg to be Drew. And then he has that Lashley feud that doesn't it was okay, it was there, didn't really do much, and then he lost to Roman in Saudi Arabia and then took years off until this year when he had his last match against Gunther. So,
and his retirement match didn't really mean shit, really, unfortunately for him. Now, I don't think that's his fault.
Right.
I think that's entirely the fault of the promotion, but it's not another feather in his cap because of that. So
yeah, and so I guess yes, he did have this comeback run, but I guess my criticism of that is really just from a Hall of Fame drawing perspective. It's really just that first 6 months he's back. So you're looking at 98, 99. 2003 to early, like mid 2003 to early 2004, and then 16, 17, right? So you really, it's like 4 years.
4
max.
years, yeah.
From a drawing perspective, like I don't think you're necessarily going to argue he's a Hall of Fame level performer. And in terms of like significance, he was never the biggest draw in the world, and he wasn't like an influential person. Well, he wasn't like an influential like person either, because like WCW died anyway, and he didn't like change the course of WWE or
I don't
anything.
I don't think Hogan '84 could have saved that company at that point.
Well, that's also true.
I'm not
blaming him. Not blaming him
in particular. Like that's just like the person's insides are on their outsides. We got an issue here, well beyond like surgery,
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. So I think like it's kind of like with Samoa Joe, just as an example, because I'm talking with Samoa Joe's crown jewel, right, is like 4 or 5 years of being just an incredible worker, kind of similar to Goldberg, like 4 years of being this incredible draw. But then Joe just accumulates like other drawing and work stuff over the years, like gradually to add to that. And Goldberg just doesn't have, like, outside of that, he just doesn't have anything else.
He does not. You are correct.
So I get why people who vote from like, hey, he was a Hall of Fame draw. He was one of the biggest stars of the most memorable eras. And okay, like I totally get that. But when I rank him relative to other people, like on the ballot, I'm just like, I'm not going to have him in my top 6.
Makes a lot of sense to me. My hesitancy with Becky Lynch is just like, I still think she's a Hall of Famer. If I could vote for 10, I'd vote for her easily. The issue I have with her is I think she's a Hall of Famer because of her historical significance, because of that main event run at Mania. I think that and being a draw on top of that around that time period is very significant. I think that we have been in several years of, at least a couple years now, of her not really being a main event draw. They keep wanting her to be a heel, and it feels like they've done that so many times against the crowd's will that like they've significantly damaged her. So I think that kind of is hurting her case. Because it'd be easier if like she was just stayed a draw at that level since that Mania main event. Like, it'd be a cakewalk. She'd already be in, I think. But, like, that's not the case. And she's missed a decent amount of time, I feel like, since then. And it's just this weird, like, how she's being used creatively in that company. I feel like that is hurting her case, or at least hindering it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she's a Hall of Fame level draw, because outside of that run,
it's the influence. It's the influence.
I would just, and I guess I would just put it this way, like in terms of, so like she's headlined, I think 10, or like was the primary drawing card, I'll just say, because headlined is the last match isn't always necessarily the biggest match, so there's some judgment involved, but I have her at 10 pay-per-views headlines in WWE, right? I'll just say, like, when I did that analysis for Samoa Joe for WWE and AEW, I had him at 10, like around that same that same thing. So I just don't like, and also from a performance standpoint, like if you're just looking at her in a vacuum, not grading on a curve for women at all, like you're not going to say like she's one of the best wrestlers of the era.
No, she's not Hall of Fame by work, I don't think. Now you could, if you add in promos, I think that she has hit that level at certain points. But I wouldn't say that, like, I wouldn't vote her in just off of work by itself.
Right.
To me, it's like not 100% a historical significance case, but it relies on that heavily.
Yeah, that's the one where that's the criteria that I think she clearly has met. And then with the other ones, it's okay. She has, like, she's not a bad wrestler. She's a good wrestler. She has some great matches. She has some strong promo years and promo performances, right? So that's all part that all gets added to it, right, to kind of push it over the top. But it's really, she's not like these other candidates where we're like, clearly meets multiple criteria, right? And I think that's the interesting thing with this is, right, like, after you get past Punk, Cody, and Moxley, like, those three guys have cases for like multiple
fields,
multiple criteria, right? After that, it's really a bunch of candidates that really only have clear cases for one, and then, okay, what do they add? How strong are they in that one, and what do they add in the others? That makes like this so fascinating, right? Like, just going down the ballot quickly, because there's some other categories we want to talk about too, but just going down like the ballot quickly, like the Steiner Bros, right? Like, they're a work tag team, and
primarily,
the significance you give them would be like the best tag team of the 90s, right? Like, that's
I have an argument that they have something of a significance case because they helped introduce that Japanese style of very physical wrestling into the US. Like a lot of suplex stuff, and I feel like that there is something of an influence case there. I wouldn't put them in the hall by that alone, but I think it's like a feather in the cap, if you will.
All right. So I think that's part of it, though, where it's like, like, work's the only thing where it's like, okay, they meet this criteria.
Yeah, like they're clearly like they definitely check the box there.
Yeah, and then Randy Orton. Some people would argue he doesn't meet any of the criteria. I'll say I think he's aggregated enough. I think he's aggregated enough drawing to be like, okay, like, he's a Hall of Fame draw. But I'm never gonna say as a work person. I'm just not a Randy Orton guy. And historical significance, like, if he's not in WWE, nothing that much is different, right? He wasn't that kind of transformational guy. Edge is funny because I think you can make a case he meets all the criteria or none of the criteria.
Yeah, no,
right?
I think I may have voted for him before, like several years ago. I wouldn't be opposed to him going in. I think he, like, if I could sit down and analyze his case, and I would not be surprised if my final conclusion would be, well, he just crosses the goal line,
Yeah, I've said before, I think Edge is like, he's either going to be the worst person in or like one of the best people out. Like,
that's really good. That's a really good way to put it. Like I'm not like Rich, who I think would like use weapons of mass destruction to prevent his induction. But like, I think that he's not a slam dunk by any stretch, but I also don't think he's a completely unworthy candidate. Like third return of Seth Rollins, or even worse, Trish Stratus.
Yeah,
like,
I think
those are.
Yeah, with Edge, I think he's done enough to say, like, okay, he's a Hall of Fame level, like, performer, or like, he has enough of a resume there between like his promos and his matches, over the years. I think he's demonstrated enough. Like, he does show up well in your award shares, stuff. And so I think sometimes people forget that a bit about him. Like, he did a lot of great work he was never like the best of the best, right? Like, he was never like.
I think clearly the high watermark of his career was the heel run opposite John Cena. Like, I think that was like a obvious Hall of Fame level year, right there. And I feel like you can piece enough together a decent argument beyond that with him. I think it's definitely respectable.
He's just not overwhelming in anything, right?
No,
where
he's
like,
not. Yeah.
Oh, you got to vote for Edge. It's like nobody's like, yeah, I have to vote for Edge. It's kind of like, well, all right, like, yeah, you don't feel that strongly about him. In anything.
And like, he is kind of cringy, and like certain parts, especially of his recent AEW run, have not hit well. Like, I think that he's done respectably in like adapting to the AEW style. He's not a complete like sore thumb sticking out, but also he's obviously not like at that level. I think he kind of, the best way I can put it is once in a while with his work, he will insist upon himself. On himself.
Oh yeah.
I feel like, you know, like the greatest match ever as an example, which was far from being the greatest match ever, is a good example of that. And you can see that sometimes with like how dramatic he wants his matches to be in AEW, and you're like, God, just like take 50% of this away and then just do good work for a while instead of like, you know, the I guess the NXT face, if you want to call it that. But like I can't put him above, you know, a whole bunch of people, so I'm not close to voting for him just because of the limit.
Yeah.
I have halfway talked myself into thinking maybe just head to head that maybe Mercedes Moné has surpassed Becky Lynch as a candidate.
Sure.
And I think that argument would basically be she has a similar positive influence argument or historical significance argument, but instead of drawing, it's ring work.
Yeah.
And I think that you add in, I think she's probably had more time as a Hall of Fame level worker than Becky has as a Hall of Fame level draw, maybe. Maybe this is me off the cuff without like actually sitting down and like, you know, all right, let's make a list or something. But I think that I may be leaning towards giving her the edge over Becky for a vote between the two of them. I really wish I would feel much better if I had 7 this year to vote for than 6. I feel like 6, I'm going to leave someone that I feel fairly strongly should be in out, and or even 8. 8 would be better. I need 8.
Yeah, well, you said you had like 10 people that you thought, and I don't. Yeah. I'll just say, like, I agree. Like, a lot of this is just kind of where do you draw the line exactly, and I think that's something. And it also in terms of drawing the line. I think way too often voters and people who talk about this get guilty of holding modern candidates to the standards of prior eras that, like, even though
it's a different business.
They came up in a different industry, right?
Yeah.
So, like when we talk, especially, it's mostly from a drawing perspective, right? And I wrote about this last year and column on Voices of Wrestling about if the voters were too harsh on modern candidates. And look, there just aren't as many places to draw. And these companies are WWE and AEW. It's like in terms of making changes from a business perspective, it's like steering a cruise ship. Like they have so much momentum in one direction or the other that it's tough to like turn that around, right? So I think in terms of assessing drawing, you have to look at not just like who was on top, but then also what were the trends while they were on top, and what was the trend before they were on top, while they were on top, and then after as well. So, and then kind of looking at variances. Like a few years ago, I tried to figure out who the best pay-per-view draws of all time were, and I was doing like a year-over-year same event like comparison for that, and like the Outsiders did really well in that. As an example, just like Nitro's ratings like increased like over 30% when they show up, and then for the same time period that Nitro existed before they showed up. So, and then they headlined a bunch of pay-per-views that had like 20, 30 or more % increases, like really impressive. Obviously incredibly short run, and Kevin Nash ruined the company with his horrible booking. So I'm not voting for them because of those things, but
they have a better case than I think one might instinctively think, especially if you're like definitely. I mean, Kevin Nash also in the ring was generally not a good worker. I mean, like he definitely had some highlight moments, but I think in general I think it'd be fair to say below average,
especially the Outsiders run, like because you're not including his Sean and Brett matches in that.
Exactly.
But it's interesting though. Like, but we got sidetracked a bit. But what I was just kind of running through the candidates. Like, we're talking about like all these guys are really more like okay, they meet one criteria, but like, do they meet any of the others, and do they have enough, or are they strong enough in that one, or have enough to offer in the others? Like who do you prioritize, like based on all that, right? Because like the Hardy Boys, it's like, okay, historical significance. They have some drawing outside WWE and AEW, but at a lower level. In ring, it's like what are their great matches outside the ladder matches, right?
Yeah.
There's that stuff. Like Trish is all historical significance, not a draw, not a worker, and the historical significance is even, I'll just say, debatable, to put it kindly.
Yeah, I think I don't have beef with her. Like, I think that she had a very admirable career. I think that if you're doing like a Hall of Fame of like just dedicated entirely to workers who worked really hard to improve themselves and accomplish that, I think she'd be like a first ballot for that. I think that it's really crappy how women were treated in North American wrestling, or at least English speaking wrestling, from like post June Myers to the basically the when Stephanie McMahon invented women's wrestling. And I will never get tired of making that joke. I'm sorry. I apologize, because I feel like if you somehow have sat through every episode of this show I've ever done, you've probably heard that joke 20 times. I'm sorry, and also I regret nothing. But like that entire time period is just like okay, what if sexism was an industry? And she, like if there was a different set of circumstances where like women were actually treated with respect, and she was given better opportunities, I could see her achieving enough to possibly be a Hall of Famer. But like, that's so far afield from where we are, and we have to evaluate the career she had. And I think that all that together, all that is a lot of words for me to say like there's not a chance in hell I'm voting for her.
Yeah, I mean, she's commonly referred to as the weakest candidate on the ballot. Now, I can understand why some would say, well, like she was the reason WWE kept the women's division around at all, right? They didn't have one before. Well, they did. What was it? Was like Sable and Stephanie McMahon were like the champions. Like
Ivory.
Like post Medusa, pre Trish, it was basically just like a prop, right? For like sexy women to hold, or like a story,
or else China would just hold the belt. I think
but even then, like they abandoned that pretty quickly. Or her contract expired, right? That's what it was.
Yeah, that's right.
Her contract expired, and then but they weren't like, again, that was just all mid card stuff. Like it was a mid card novelty act, and then Trish actually got them to keep the division around, hire more actual, and then give them time to wrestle and have matches and do those sorts of things. I think the problem that hurts Trish's significance a bit and influence is that, she kind of got them to keep the division around, but then for the next decade, it's, just the same mid-card novelty stuff. Until the four horsewomen show up and then start having performances as good as the men, and that's what starts getting it pushed up the card, right? And Ronda Rousey obviously acquiring her. So that's that's why it's like, she doesn't. I mean, I see it. I see where people are coming from, but it doesn't. I'm not sold on it at all.
No, and then, I mean, God bless her, and God bless that whole women's division in the aughts and first half of the teens and all that, but like like no.
I'll just add a couple other thoughts without getting into it too much. Like FTR, I think people might wonder like, hey, why is FTR on the ballot? But I think if you look at their, you had them as second or in the Observer Award shares for teams that aren't in. I think were they only behind the Briscoes, or were them and the Briscoes were the top two? I know.
Yeah, and the Briscoes have a huge lead, but it's FTR is third all time actually.
All time. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So like it's the Bucks and the Briscoes, and I think FTR has surpassed the Midnight Express in that measure.
So they've been a Hall of Fame level tag team for longer than people remember, because they have their 2016 NXT run where they're working with American Alpha and Ciampa and Gargano, and then they have their whole AEW run. Basically, they've been like one of the best tag team, one of the 5 best tag teams in the world that whole time.
Now, I will push back slightly just because I think they disappear sometimes in AEW. So like I wouldn't say that every year has been a Hall of Fame level, but I think that you could definitely piece together like 4-ish and then add in the year from NXT. And that leads into the conversation of how are we supposed to evaluate tag teams? Are we supposed to give them like make it a little easier for them to get in, like expect less time wise because they're together for less time? Or are we supposed to hold them to the exact same standards as single wrestlers? And I don't think Dave is clear on this. And I feel like some people just are just like, well, they weren't around for a decade. I'm like, yeah, but tag teams are, very rarely are. And if we're only inducting tag teams that are around for a decade, like I feel like that's really strict.
Yeah, I think. Well, I'll just put it like Sergeant Slaughter got inducted, right? And so he was about, it was like 5-year prime, maybe a little bit more than that, right? I think with tag teams, I'll put it this way. I think you assess their in-ring and their drawing the same way you would assess a criteria. But then I do think like just based on where they rank within their era as a tag team, I think you can give them some historical significance that you wouldn't necessarily give the singles act for that. I think that's kind of how you balance that out, I think. But hey, look, I'm just going to say, I think you're selling them short a bit on where they rank or how many years. Like I'll just going through the Observer Awards, I'll just say 2024 number 3 tag team, 2023 they were number 1, also at the number 5 match of the year against Jay White and Juice Robinson. 2022 they were number 1. That was the year they also had the Briscoes feud, and so those are like 2 of the top 5 matches of the year. Number 1 feud of the year that year with the Briscoes. In 2022, 2021, that was the year they were kind of got lost a little bit, but still got voted number 3 for best tag team that year. 2020 they had the Bucks feud.
I would say 4 years from AEW.
Yeah. So, and then, also have their NXT year. So, they've been together, and then they have this year too, which is also probably going to be, they're probably going to be the best tag team of the year this year.
Might be 5 years AEW then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just
getting up there. It's getting up there.
I'm pretty close on them, honestly. I think that this might be a case where I won't vote for them this go round, but if they have another year as strong as this year has been, then I think that I would probably say they're Hall of Fame worthy. I think they're pretty close.
Yeah, they are. I think they're on their way. I
also do not expect them to get elected anytime soon, unfortunately. But
yeah, definitely not. Definitely not.
But
it's tough.
I think it's going to be hard because I think that the electorate frustrates me sometimes because some of them are just like, well, I'm not voting for anyone that's active, and I'm like, yeah, but like it's the Ken Griffey Jr. argument, but I guess, but like no one's not putting Ken Griffey Jr. in the Hall of Fame because he was great in his 20s and then like fell apart in his 30s. You're still going to be like, well, he was one of the greatest baseball players ever for like a decade. And like I remember who said it. His name is escaping me, but he's a very good historian and I respect his work a lot. But he said that he wouldn't vote for Kazuchika Okada the year he got inducted.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Because what if he killed someone? And it's like, well, we didn't take Chris Benoit out when he literally did that. Like, if that's our standard, then like there's no way to get out of this Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on
morally.
My thoughts on more like morality feeding into it is more, I think it's like you brought up like Rick Steiner with the Steiner brothers. Like the Steiners are more like borderline candidates. So then people are like, I'm just not going to vote for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Or in the past, like, Dick Murdoch and Rocky Johnson, like they're some borderline guys where like some stuff.
It makes it easier to not vote for them. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's more than now I will. So when it comes to like things that are historically significant, because it's in a positive manner, I think a lot of people take that way too like they try to construe things as negative, like we brought up with Sabu and like
Yeah.
his influence. It's like, no, that's not a negative on the industry. The negative on the industry was people ripping it off and doing it too often, right? Like that's how it became a negative. It was a positive for a very long time because the fans liked it, and that's why everybody copied it and did it for so often. But from like a negative historical significance, I think is more for like people like Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff, who like had like really negative. They're historically significant. You can't argue that, but it's not in a good way overall. Or like,
I think the analogy I would go with is people not voting for Jesse Ventura as a Hall of Famer solely, like they would say, yes, I think he's a Hall of Fame level performer and he checks all the boxes, but I'm not going to vote for him because we've had 40 years of people trying to rip him off and doing it poorly.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the thing with Sabu, is it's basically equivalent, and it's kind of nonsense, you know?
Yeah. And in terms of other, like, I'll just say, I think like in order for historical significance to be negative, at least the way I look at it, it's not about like being negative for like a promotion because like someone had a falling out with a promoter, or because that would happen all the time. I think it's more like you have to damage like the industry in your region, or, like somehow.
Significant stuff, yeah. Let me ask you something. Would you, as a voter, I'll ask you two questions. One, would you like to see Chris Benoit put on another recall vote? And two, how do you think you would vote on that? Would you want to recall him or not? And I'll explain why I think that there is an argument to do another recall just because the electorate is so different at this point that I think you could argue that it'd be worth having that opinion. And frankly, I think it's kind of embarrassing he's in a sense.
Yeah, I'll put it this way. I don't really care. Like, it doesn't bother me because it's, I guess I'll put it this way. It's like O.J. Simpson was in the Hall of Fame, right? Like, and that's based on his career, like as a football player, not like him as a human being. Obviously, everybody knows, like, he was a Hall of Fame football player who was like one of the worst people imaginable, right? And that's kind of the same thing with Chris Benoit. Like, I know there's some there might be a little bit more leeway there when people talk about brain damage and different things with him, but still, it's like nobody's like, oh yeah, Chris Benoit, great guy, right? Or like those people are very few and far between. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want the Hall of Fame conversation to all be about that. I think it's like, yep, Chris Benoit had a Hall of Fame career, and then he, became a monster that like actually set the industry back.
And that's the real thing. Like, obviously what he did is morally disgusting. There's no way around that. Like, but I think the argument for his removal is really he did a lot of damage to the industry because of that. And in addition to being a terrible, terrible person, like that's also like I think that is the grounds, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's more like I just don't want like part of the Hall of Fame thing to be recalling people potentially all the time. And so fair. I'm fine. Like, it's look, nobody's like, oh, he's in the Hall of Fame. Like, why is that? It's like, well, he got inducted before he killed his family and killed himself. And then, it's just, and no one looks like, oh, well, he must not be that bad if he was, because he's in the Observer Hall of Fame. It's like, everybody knows. Like, there's
actually killing your wife, son, and yourself is good. Dave Belzer says.
Yeah, nobody, it's not like influencing anybody to think differently of him. I'll just say. Are there any? What about? I was going to ask you. What about your non-wrestlers? Like, have anyone stand out there for you?
I barely looked at that. Let's see. Okay, who have I voted for? So let's look at who got inducted. Did I close out the list of inductees again? Yes, I did.
I have mine up. So if you're just interested in who got inducted last year for non-wrestlers.
I've vamped enough. I just like making fun of myself. This is my worst. One of my worst internet habits is like I'll have a list up and I'll be like, I will refer to this in 5 minutes, and then 3 minutes pass, and I'm like, I don't need this ever again. I don't know what is wrong with my brain.
Bobby Davis was the non-wrestler that got in
he was
last
the
year.
one that got in. So the ones I voted for before are the other ones I voted for last year are Bobby Bruns, the Grand Wizard, Morris Siegel, Ted Turner, and Roy Welch.
Okay.
Those, and I think that I don't have much of a reason to not put those on the list again. Let me just look over. Like I think Jesse Ventura's got a good argument. As an announcer, I'll have to give him thoughts. And then, I mean, yeah, there's people I wouldn't mind seeing in off this list. I also wouldn't mind seeing Rossi Ogawa completely fall off the list. Because I think that whatever Hall of Fame argument he had has been completely destroyed by 2025 Stardom. The whole like, oh, well, the thing with him is, one, the argument for him is just so like he could have been anything from a photographer to the creative mastermind. Like it's such a 0 to 100, and like everyone's like, oh no, that's not true, this is true. And it's like, okay, great, can we actually get some evidence? And then two, the whole like, oh, he's the only person that can have the creative foresight for modern Joshi wrestling, and and then he leaves Stardom hires a guy that like basically has never booked wrestling before, I don't think, and they just the afterburners are on for their business.
Yeah,
how does that work?
Yeah, a lot of it's because Bushiroad owns them and can promote them
more
better,
money, more resources.
Right.
Yeah.
But
compared to like specifically Ogawa under Bushiroad to Stardom with Bushi and not Ogawa, I mean, like how that's like an anti-argument, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've never voted for Rossi for precisely the same reasons that you brought up. And if more ever comes out about like, okay, no, this is definitely like if he was definitely part of
like actual evidence, like I'm
Joshi
happy
boom in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And early 90s, like, okay, like if that ever gets proven, then all right. But until then, I'm just off. I'm just on him. I will say I vote for all the same people you just mentioned, and Jesse Ventura is the new person I'm adding. So
well, there we go.
Ted Turner, Morris Siegel, Roy Welch, Bobby Bruns. I think those four are like you have to vote for those four.
Yeah.
You just have to vote for that just because their significance to the history of wrestling and the industry it's just so significant. Like Bobby Bruns, obviously, Ricky training Ricky Dozan and turning him into the godfather of Japanese pro wrestling. Morris Siegel, multiple decades as a promoter in Texas, and innovated a lot of the like tag team wrestling. I don't think he invented tag team wrestling, but it wasn't a big thing when he started like promoting it. And just also like Paul Bosch is in the Hall of Fame as a promoter, and he built the territory like before Paul took it over and trained Paul as well. So similar with Roy Welch and his territory as well. Like he was obviously a long time like very successful promoter as well. And so they're just from so long ago though. Like people, that's why they don't get the votes, unfortunately, right? And Ted Turner, that's more obvious. Like he was the reason WCW existed. Without him, there's no WCW, and that's not even a debate.
No, like he literally changed the industry for the better, because when there's two major promotions, it is financially much better for the workers. It creates more jobs. It's undoubtedly better. And like the argument against him is basically like, well, he wasn't like involved in the day to day, and it's like doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Like I don't care if he wasn't the booker or whatever. I don't care that he wasn't Vince McMahon, like hands and everything. I care that he created an alternative. He kept it alive. He made it financially viable. He helped, pump in resources to make sure it could get to being financially viable. That's not Hall of Fame stuff. I just feels insane to me that he's not in. I understand. Like, look, I'm not exactly lining up to fall over to be like, hey, billionaires. Pretty awesome, right? But like it's the facts of it. He's essential to the wrestling industry. I don't know, you can't tell the history of like 80s and 90s wrestling without Ted Turner.
No,
It's
you can't. You can't. You can't.
I mean, it's like the anti-Randy Orton, in that sense.
Exactly.
Um,
So yeah, I mean, we have like exactly the same people. I have one more vote left for a non-wrestler, because I also vote for the four that we just mentioned, and then Jesse Ventura is someone I'm voting for because he invented I'm not sure if he invented it. He might have invented it, but if not, he at least was the innovator and popularized the heel commentator role. He's the one everybody copies.
He perfected it. He perfected it.
Yeah, he's the one everybody copies. And then he there's other stuff with him too, but I mean that's in and of itself is more than enough. And then I also agree with you on Grand Wizard. Just that he has his WWF run as a manager there, and then before that was managing the Sheik for a long time, and the Sheik didn't talk, so he needed someone to talk for him. So that's an incredibly impressive managerial career as well. So those are 6 of the 7, and then I have to figure out who I'm gonna use the last one on. I think Koichi Yoshizawa is really interesting because
he was a historian, right, from Japan.
Well, he was a reporter too. He was the reason. So basically, and in the latest Wrestling Observer Radio, they talk about this a bit. But he was the reason, U.S. publications knew so much about Japanese wrestling.
Oh, that's pretty influential.
Before internet, that all came through him. And then similarly, the same reason Japan knew about U.S. wrestling was because that would also, a lot of that would come through him.
Awesome.
So that's a really fascinating case there where obviously as technology got better, that became,
the barriers broke down.
But for a long time, it was filtering primarily through him, passing stuff back and forth. So I think that's really interesting. Ethan Tyler always brings up, if Bill Apter's in, then Stanley Weston has to be in as well.
That's a reasonable argument, but I don't know that I voted for Apter, and
sure. If you don't like Apter in, then it's not going to be very convincing for you, right?
It's not that I don't think Apter is a bad candidate by any stretch, but the thing is it's that maximum, and I think there's just better options. I would put in. At least before Apter. Now I think Weston's a better case than Apter, but Apter's the guy that everyone knows by name. But Jim Johnston, I think, has a pretty good case. I think one thing that always kind of sticks in my craw with the Hall of Fame is that there's no referees in, and a ref should be in. You should have a ref. Joe Higuchi is a pretty good candidate. I think if you were to put in Tommy Young, I think has previously been on the ballot. I think he's a worthy guy. I think that, and people are like, well, how do you evaluate a referee? And I'm like, well, if they're working the main events for decades, it's probably a good sign.
That's the other thing. We have the non-wrestlers. It's these old guys who are extremely influential, a bunch of announcers, and then
basically just every announcer you could think of that isn't in already, more or less.
And then these odd
fringe cases,
this odd group of people that were the best at what they did, but
and they contributed.
But what they do isn't necessarily stuff you're going to prioritize the most. Jim Johnston, he's the best music guy, right? By far. And he actually, you can say he has a drawing case because they sold a lot of records based on the songs too in the the late 90s, early 2000s.
But it's to me, it's a better version of the Reggie Parks case. But it's very similar. It's very similar.
It is. Reggie Parks, I don't think he's ever going to make it, and I'm not going to be voting for him. But I will just say all the belts that have come after Reggie Parks they're going the wrong. The WWE ones are so bad, and the AEW ones too aren't nearly as the world title, because he designed the world title.
I think he did.
I think, and none of their other ones are nearly as beautiful as that. So it's
the past decade of WWE titles have just really gotten worse and worse looking. Remember the Prawns tag team championships, and that particular era was so awful. And I
Like
also
copper, look like pennies.
yeah, and like even New Japan. Did Parks do New Japan's belts, or is that someone else? I can't recall.
No, he did. He did.
Okay, well, that's another good argument because their current World Heavyweight Championship, or whatever they call it, because they changed the name, and we're like, we could have 40 years of history, or we could not. Why don't we not?
I think
that belt sucks too. So.
He did the good one before that everybody loved. So yeah.
And then they were like, why don't we retire the good one? Like, well, why? Stop it.
That's the thing. He's so much better at it than everybody else. Like it's startling. Like how
I mean, and that's kind of the Zane Brezov argument, is like he was the best at this whole kind of, I guess, just booking buildings, but also selling, like, this very nebulous kind of marketing thing.
Yeah, and, local promoter. But he promoted like a lot of WWF big shows and a lot of WCW stuff, like during their hot period.
Yeah, and he made a difference in that hot in the WCW hot period. I'm aware of that for sure. But like, it just feels like such a weird. And I just feel like referee is such a much clearer contribution than like the best belt designer, like it just, in my mind, I can't like get over this, I'm like,
I think a lot of people just that I think there's just like a layer of also like, what do you care about? Like between these things, like I think Jim Johnston gets more support because he's like, oh yeah, those songs were awesome, like it moves them emotionally in some way. With like the belts or the referees, like some people might just not care like at all about it and be like, I'm not going to vote for the guy. I don't care about belts, or I don't care about referees. Like just their job's just like just not be like awful as a referee. That's all I really need, right?
But I mean, like a great ref can really add to a match, and I think
controversy, a bad ref can really take away from it.
Oh yeah, I will never forgive Bryce Remsburg for the MJF Page main event a few months ago, in particular. Like that was just an all-time bad performance.
I don't know if that was his fault as much as that just didn't make any sense in the first place. Like, I don't know what they were trying to do there.
He's not exactly Daniel Day-Lewis with the subtle acting, but like, I think he really helped make a bad situation worse with his like, I have to be the most dramatic person to ever exist kind of thing.
Although I will say his performance on one of those WrestleMania weekend shows where he refereed the Invisible Man versus the Invisible Stan. Like that was that.
Look, I will give him some shit because I think he does too much sometimes, but he also is very good at this one specific way of refereeing that I think in general is pretty good, but can get pretty annoying also. So like, but that match was a masterclass.
That's just him. Like that's the thing. Like it's for anybody who doesn't know, if you can find this on YouTube, Invisible Man versus Invisible Stan. It's the concept is it's two invisible wrestlers wrestling each other. Yes. And so
this is the closest I'll ever get to making like a Matt D style post about wrestling.
And so it's just the only thing that the crowd's reacting to is Bryce, and Bryce's, between his facial expressions, the things he's saying and his movements, he is basically demonstrating like this match that is happening, which includes those guys like going up to the balcony or all sorts of different things. And it's just, it's really fascinating to watch because the crowd, he is able to, just through his gestures, the crowd is able to pick up on what he is communicating the invisible wrestlers are doing. And obviously this is like the smarkiest of smart crowds attending a Mania weekend show 10 years ago or something.
You do this in like a WWE crowd
it is very it's a very indie thing to do, but just the fact that he pulls it off at all is absolutely incredible.
It is brilliant. And
like, he probably shouldn't do that. It's not like, it's like, all right, tone it down a bit, buddy, when you're dealing in the different scenarios.
You're at a I need you at like a 6. You operate regularly on a 13.
Yes.
For the Invisible Man Stan match, it was like a 23, but it was needed for that. So like, But yeah, like he drives me a little crazy, but like I still think he is pretty. I would evaluate him as generally good. But I will always be chapped in the ass because of that too. So
It makes sense. Makes sense.
yeah.
Anyway, he's no Joe Higuchi, right? Which is why
No,
Joe
yeah, or
Higuchi's on the ballot.
even Red Shoes Uno or whoever. I think I do wonder what percentage Red Shoes would get. You know, I
Negative historical significance for giving us Shota.
look, you can only control so much. Fern Gagne's in, you know, like we've been doing this for an hour 42. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up?
Oh yeah, I'm just going to try to. I'll just say for Mexico, this year I'm voting for Dorel Dixon, Grant Hamada, and Sangre Chicana.
Seems like good picks.
Yep. So those are my three there. Grant Hamada, just incredibly influential and an amazing worker for his time. His influence is just so vast. Like he's the godfather of lucharisu in terms of taking the lucha libre style, bringing that to Japan, and bringing some of the Japanese style to Mexico. And he was previously in the Japanese region, but he fell off for 1550. Mexico is where he was the best drawing case, so I think that helps him there. But also, it's just he's just as in terms of like meeting. Even if he doesn't meet the drawing criteria, it doesn't matter. And he has something to offer in that from his time in Mexico. But just as a performer, easily a Hall of Fame level performer and wrestler. And then historical significance is vast because, again, Dragon Gate doesn't exist without him. Like you can tie that style of wrestling and everything all the way back to him. So, so he's like one of the strongest guys on the ballot. So that's why I'm voting in Mexico this year. And then had to do my research to make sure I didn't want to just be one of those drive-by voters that screws everybody else in the category because I just like one guy.
I try not to. Yeah.
So I looked at the other ones, researched the other candidates, and landed on Dixon and Chicana as my two other picks there. Japan's a really interesting region this year. I'll just say I'm still not sure on who I'm voting for outside of Hayabusa. So I am.
Yeah, I think this is a region right now where you could justifiably vote for no one. In a sense, I wouldn't agree with it, but you could, and you could also like max out at 3 and be like, I wish I had more votes.
Yeah, it's so all like the obvious people have gotten in already, like all the biggest stars from like
which is the goal.
Yeah, right. That is. And so like obviously all the people on it now are interesting because you have Toyota and Yamada who were a tag team they were a great tag team but were only together for so long, right? You have Fujiwara who was never like a tippy top draw. Like he was a headliner had a very long career, but every time he tried to create a new promotion around himself, and there were many, they all died within like a year or two. So, and then, like Takayama he was an amazing wrestler, but like his prime didn't last quite that long. And he was also on top when like all the promotions were declining. So, which isn't necessarily his fault, right? Because the whole industry was going down, but you mix that with the longevity, it can be a little bit tough. He also wasn't like, nobody built their entire promotion around him for a very long period of time either. So yeah, there's just, and then Inoki and Sakaguchi. Inoki's already in. People are like, well, Inoki's a god. Like this doesn't really matter. Miko Satomura, who is like, that's one where it's like I totally see like if you think she's a Hall of Fame level wrestler and you want to give her historical significance for keeping Joshi alive, like during that really dark period that existed.
Yeah,
I see the other side of that, which is also it was such a low level during that period. Like, do we induct anybody, any of the women from that period in? If it was going to be anyone, it would be her, you'd think. But it's,
tangentially here, I want to just make my normal argument that I agree that there is a level of subjectivity to basically every aspect of the Hall of Fame, but especially with evaluating someone as a Hall of Fame performer as not. But I very strongly think that there's like, you can look at evidence like, what we talked about multiple times now, the Observer Award shares and other things like that, just to kind of like, okay, this is what people thought in real time about someone as a performer. And I think that has actual value that should be considered.
Yeah, absolutely. Then there's the new candidates in Japan, Saber, Io Shirai, and Mochizuki, which are all three like they worked on top in their various promotions and were also excellent wrestlers for very over a decade, like very extremely good wrestlers. And so whether you vote for them or not probably comes down to how strong, who do you rate like the best, and do you think they're Hall of Fame level already, and is that enough for you? Because they're all three of them are primarily work candidates. Right. So, yeah, I think like the beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Oh, and then there's also Tiger Jeet Singh, who is, a draw for multiple decades, but the dirt worst wrestler.
Dog shit worst.
Yeah. So, right. So anyway, this all brings me to Hayabusa. So I'm one of like the biggest Hayabusa supporters, which is because one, I think he has historical significance in a major way. Because, just as an example, Will Ospreay did his tribute to him both in New Japan and then at Forbidden Door. I think it was last year or the year before. Yeah, it was last year. And he cited Hayabusa as like one of his primary influences in terms of his wrestling style. So directly influenced the best wrestler in the world and one of the best ever. A host of other people, when he passed away, like the Young Bucks talked about him, like Ricochet cited him as one of his primary influences as well. Seth Rollins, obviously, Falcon Arrow, Phoenix Splash, moves Hayabusa invented. So anytime anybody's using those, they're using moves he invented. So I think that's the biggest thing, is his influence makes him historically significant in a positive manner. But then also I think his in-ring, I think it's fair to say, all right, he was a very good wrestler, not necessarily a Hall of Fame level performer, because, he wasn't, while he was like an incredible innovator and he was very good, maybe I don't like his work quite as much to say he's a Hall of Fame level performer, but no one's going to say he's bad, right? He was very good.
Yeah.
I do think it's fascinating that in 2025, there is a new Hayabusa who we don't know who he is, but he's wearing the gimmick and he's doing the old Hayabusa's moves. He's not adding new stuff, and he's still excellent and fits in perfectly in today's wrestling, which I think just goes to show how far ahead of his time Eiji Ozaki was as Hayabusa. And then the last thing I'll bring up is just his drawing case. I've written about this before, but I don't think people realize just how big FMW was. I think people think it was like Dragon Gate or Noah or All Japan in more recent years, and is no, they were
huge.
Onita's retirement show does over 50,000 people, and Hayabusa was his opponent for that. The next year, and also but FMW, the first 6 years, it's all built around Onita. He was the top guy for every single big event. Even if he lost, it was just to build to him winning again. And then he wins his retirement match against Hayabusa and pieces out to go try to be in movies. And then Hayabusa's tasked with being the top guy in FMW. And it did fall off, right? Because Onita is one of the biggest draws ever. Yeah. But still, in 96, they do over 30,000 people for their anniversary show. He has a number of other events that do over 10,000, and he is clearly the number 2 top guy behind Onita in FMW's history. And during FMW's first 6 years of existence, it was the number 3 promotion in Japan. It was just because they were more, you could argue UWF, but UWF didn't do that many shows, so that was
and it was this was a hot period for Japan.
Exactly.
It's much different than being the number 3 promotion in Japan right now.
Yes, exactly. And then the other thing I'll point out though is while FMW did decline in the latter half of the 90s and eventually went out of business in 01 after Hayabusa got paralyzed, or early 02, late 01, he got paralyzed. It was still the 3rd biggest promotion in Japan during the next 6 years, after Onita retired the first time. Now, he did come back for about a year or so, but he wasn't the same level of draw he was before because people really held it against him that he did this whole retirement thing and then came back. Yeah. It hurt his drawing power. And Hayabusa was the main primary guy during that second 6-year period. And so while they did decline, they were still overall the 3rd biggest promotion in Japan. And like, All Japan women during that period like declined significantly as well, and All Japan men also declined quite a bit during that period. So the decline wasn't just like, it's because Hayabusa wasn't a draw. It was because the whole industry was going down during that second half of the 90s. And like they also brought him, and so with him on top, they were able to keep FMW like in the same place it was before within the hierarchy. And then also he would headline in other promotions like War. Tenru brought him in to headline an anniversary show with against him for War. Michinoku Pro would bring him in on like one of their anniversary shows that drew really well to be part of the headlining match. So I just think he's clearly historically significant in a positive manner. Like he exceeds that criteria, and then he has a lot to offer in both drawing and in ring work as well. And so that's why, to me, he is the obvious strongest candidate on the ballot in Japan this year. And also, I'll just add, like when it comes to influence and historical significance, he's like the number one guy the active wrestlers vote for. That the active wrestlers that vote in the Hall of Fame, like he's the number one guy. So the wrestlers that vote, they're telling us like, hey, this guy was highly influential for us. And I think as other voters who aren't wrestlers, like we need to listen to them on that and say like, okay, like he clearly was extremely influential. And if they're, they believe that to vote for him for the Hall of Fame, I think we should listen and, vote for him as well.
Yeah, I think that's a point in his favor for sure. I think I agree that he's the clearest candidate, and I would probably vote for him. I am planning on voting in Japan. I don't know. I may vote for Zack Sabre Jr. I think that you could definitely argue that he's had the run as an in-ring performer for enough time to make that case pretty strongly. I think he is otherwise very weak as a candidate. I know that he's been on top of New Japan, but I feel like that's like just very much.
Do you know what he reminds me of? Yeah, do you know what he reminds? It's a bit like Benoit and Guerrero, like getting those runs on top, right? So it's like, oh, okay, at least like they're not like a career mid-carder, like they actually did get some time on top, which helps. It's funny how that works, where it's like, all right, well, they're not Hall of Fame level draws now, but it's like, okay, now they have a little something to, in that to support them. So I could see that. I find Zach fascinating because everyone agrees, like he's been great for a really long time. But during that time period, nobody's like, oh yeah, Zack Sabre Jr. is like the best wrestler in the world.
Yeah, I think that's like he's always been like the 7th or something,
or like 10 to 20 maybe, something like that.
And is that a Hall of Fame case? And like I feel like it's different now in that ring work matters, I think, so much more than historically, in a sense. Like I think that you're much more likely to get pushed if you're just a great wrestler than basically any time in the modern history. But like, I don't know, man. He is. I just kind of can't get over the fact. Like, I don't know that I've ever considered him necessarily like a clear-cut top 5 guy. But then again, I have him 3rd in the world for this year, so maybe I just am underrating him. I had him 5th last year with my FSM ballot, and I had him 11th the year before. So maybe I'm not giving him enough credit. I don't know.
Yeah, I think some interesting people to compare him to would be like, in terms of guys who were in the Hall of Fame, right? Like you have like Minoru Suzuki, Jun Akiyama, Yuji Nagata, right? Like when those guys were on top, it wasn't going well necessarily all the time, right? Like they were on top during some down periods, but they were just great and they also weren't like necessarily the guys that people recognized as like the absolute best wrestlers in the world. But they just had a lot of greatness, and they did headline a bit, they headlined quite a bit. And mostly just like a lot of greatness from an in-ring perspective for a really long time. And so maybe some people feel Zach's already there, or maybe feel like he'll get there in time. But I think those are probably the comps in terms of like Hall of Famers that you're looking at if you're voting for Zach. You're saying, okay, he kind of fits in with like that type of candidate, and that's why I'm willing to vote for him. I'm kind of undecided on him and everyone outside of Hayabusa, but I think he might be someone I pull the trigger on.
Yeah. I'm leaning towards yes on him, but I have not fully decided, and I could see myself deciding that I'd like another year or two of him just because he's 38. I mean, he is pretty young. And I just projecting, though, I don't think he has a chance in hell of getting in this year.
Probably not, but I think he's worth keeping around. I'll say.
No, I don't want him to fall off. And like I said, I am leaning towards yes, but I just think that I think he's going to have the problem of so many voters only care if you're a draw, and also so many voters won't vote for you if you're active.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least like kind of close to mid-career, that I could see him. I wouldn't want this to happen, but I could see him falling off.
All right, you might have just motivated me to vote for him then, because I don't.
Okay.
I don't want him to fall off, and I think he's pretty. I think he's kind of close. Like it's not. Yeah. I do think he's unique. Like some people talk about him as influential because of his style. I don't think that's accurate. But I do think that actually help. I think it's more just like he's doing something different and standing out from everybody else, which makes him more like, it does make him more distinctive and make his career a bit more distinctive too.
Yeah, I think it actually is a little bit of a benefit to his in-ring argument or his performing argument, more so than any kind of influence, because we're not going to have like 70 Zack Sabre Jr. impersonators, in a decade. I'm not holding my breath on that happening. And I think I when I do the award shares, I do tackle the category, the style of wrestling categories, the best brawler, best player, best technician. But I don't think just like, oh, this guy's like the best brawler of his era is enough for a guy to get in. So
yeah. I wonder if he'll have influence in terms of getting wrestlers to name moves the same way Fall Out Boy names songs. Just incredibly long and unusual names.
Yeah. Hurrah. There's a bunch on here that I'm like, I think you should be on the ballot. I just don't know if I'm going to vote for you. I feel like Inoki and Sakaguchi probably have a pretty strong case, but like you mentioned, people are just like, yeah, but Inoki's already in, so why do I care?
Yeah, I think with the tag teams where one person's in and one person isn't, it's the way I've kind of looked at that is, I'll just say in general, is it seems like it's more like it was just a chapter in Bigger Star's career, or there are some exceptions to that, like with the Briscoes, for the other Briscoe brothers, for example. I think
Jerry.
Yeah, I think like with that, like being like, I think that extended like Jack Briscoe's like drawing period, because he wasn't necessarily going to be like the world champion forever, but now he could like be in the top tag team in a bunch of different places because he had his brother to be with him and work with. There's something about like brother and family teams that's just, it's different to me than like just like two people that were together for a little while and one of them like went on to do bigger things. I think if the tag team like extends a top star's drawing period or like period of relevance, then I think that's like a really strong thing. But if it's more just like, early part of the career, then they went on to do bigger and better things, I'm less inclined for that. And with Inoki and Sakaguchi, it's like, all right, how much was Sakaguchi adding to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because it's not a case that I've dug deeply into, but it does feel so much like this is just bonus Inoki.
Yeah, versus like, I will say, obviously Holy Demon Army got inducted.
Yeah, oh yeah, and
I was already considered.
HDA definitely different.
But that's because it's like Taue. Like if you just replace Taue with like someone else, right? Like it's still a great team because it has Kawada, but Taue took it from being
special.
like just like a good or great tag team to like this is the best tag team ever, because he was in it. So yeah, like I definitely voted for them, and that was that one seemed like incredibly obvious, right? But yeah, for some of these other ones, it's kind of like I don't and also if you're choosing between like a candidate that's not in at all versus a tag team where like the better person's already in, you're kind of like you're not as motivated, I'll say, to kind of pull that trigger.
Yeah. Well, anything else before we head out?
No, I just thanks for having me on. I love talking about this. Love talking about the Hall of Fame, and hopefully some voters are listening, and I convince them to vote for Hayabusa this year. But also just love. It's just such a great time of year to learn about wrestling, and both from the current era and from the past, and re-examining like the recent past to kind of figure out how to put recent events into a historical perspective. So yeah, it's just something I really enjoy and look forward to every year.
The Hall of Fame is fantastic. It's one of my favorite things every year. Let's get your plugs in. You got anything to plug?
Yeah, I'll just I write for Voices of Wrestling every once in a while. I will have my Hall of Fame column coming out at some point over the next few weeks, definitely by the end of the month before the ballots are due. I'll just be breaking down all the modern candidates, kind of pros and cons, different things, using some stats in terms of like number of events, headlines, cage match data, day 4-star matches, different things like that to kind of compare them. So I'll have that out over the next week or two, and just looking forward to seeing what the results are finally once everybody does vote. Always kind of anxious and anticipating finally getting those results after everything goes through. But just look out for that Hall of Fame column on Voices of Wrestling sometime later this month.
All right. Thanks again for joining us. It was a great show, Adam. Always a pleasure to talk with you. And I hope you all have a great day. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves. Bye now.
Hello, Voices of Wrestling listener. Dave Ryan here. Have you ever wondered to yourself how many hidden gems are hidden away inside the last years of World Championship Wrestling? Have you ever asked yourself how many tenuous gags can be made about the name Mike Enos? And have you ever thought about what it sounds like for two Irishmen to interpret a very chaotic company through its B show? The answers to all this and more are just a click away. Check out Days of Thunder every second Thursday on the Voices of Wrestling podcast network.
Hey kids, Jeff Hawkins from Shake Them Ropes here, and for almost 15 years we have been part of Voices of Wrestling. Myself and Chris Novembrino give a review of that week's news, the lazy river of wrestling criticism of that week's WWE and AEW, and then Vader Club, where we watch something from one of our past, or something we may have missed. Smart, snarky, and sometimes serious, but not always. That's us, and if that's your vibe, we'd love to have you listen to Shake Them Ropes every week on the Voices of Wrestling podcasting network.